Not only is cracked glass a fun technique to do, but it draws attention to your focal images and creates a beautiful vintage look. Let me show you the tools and products you're going to need to do the cracked glass technique. First, you're going to need a Versamark pad. Then you're going to need some embossing powder, clear embossing powder. And in this case, I'm using the ultra thick embossing enamel. And you may have heard this product referred to as UT. It's a great embossing powder for this technique. You're also going to need a heat tool or embossing gun. Then optional products that you'll need for this technique is a brown dye ink pad, and I'm using the Memento Rich Cocoa, and a sponge dauber. I like to use these two products at the end to just create a little bit more of a vintage look, but you don't have to do that and it'll still look great. You're also going to need a stamped image. In this case, what I've done here is I've stamped the pumpkin image from the Signs of Autumn Stamp TV kit, and then I've colored them in with Copic markers, and I've sponged some Memento Rich Cocoa ink all over the surface. So at this point, once you have your image ready to go, now we're going to begin the cracked glass process. Now you'll notice that I have a lid to a box. You can use the lid to a shoe box or a lid to any box that you have. But the reason why I'm going to use a lid is because when you're embossing your image, you really can't touch it because the entire surface is going to be embossed. So if you lay it down in something flat, then you can emboss without touching it. You don't have to worry about it blowing around or blowing off your table. So to begin, I've got a piece of scratch paper here. And I'm going to take my Versamark pad and take my image, and I'm just going to pat my image all over that Versamark pad. I want to make sure that I completely cover the surface of my image with embossing with Versamark. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to add just a little more to make sure it's nice and wet. Okay. Now the next step is to pour your embossing powder over the surface of your picture stamp here, this image. Now the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to pour it all over. And I'm going to grab it out of there, brush away a little bit of the excess, and I'm going to lay it in my box top. And then, because I folded my scratch paper in half, it makes it real easy to put that embossing powder away. But I'm not going to close it up yet because I'm going to use it again. Now, I'm going to begin to emboss the surface of my pumpkins. And what you're going to see is, as this starts to emboss, it's going to leave a very shiny finish on the surface, but it's going to be a little bit ripply. That's okay, you want it to be a little bit ripply. And you should be able to see that shining up. See how nice this is when you use the lid? You don't have to worry about it burning your fingers. You don't have to worry about it blowing off your table. It just kind of stays put. Okay. Now, while that's still hot, I'm going to pour another coat of embossing powder right on top of that. And then I'm going to pour this back onto my scratch paper. And then get rid of that. I'm going to lay that back into my box top, and again, I'm going to emboss it. Now what you're going to see start to happen is, as you continue to add layers of embossing powder on top, the little bumps that you once had are going to go away, and it's going to become more and more of a glassy finish. I'm just going to move that into the center a little bit more. Heat it up just a little bit more, and while it's still warm and wet, I'm going to pour more embossing powder on top. And I'll put that in my scratch paper. lay that back in my lid. And that should be all the embossing powder I need. And this last layer of embossing powder will make it super shiny and smooth as glass. And we'll do a little close-up after I'm done embossing this so that you can see what I mean when I say it is smooth as glass. Okay, now in our close-up shot you can see, you can't see any little bumps or any little ripples or anything. It's just shiny and smooth. Might be a little hard to see on the camera, but you should be able to see that little bit of shine on this little edge there. Now, the next step for cracked glass is we're going to let this cool just a little bit, and then we're going to put it in our freezer. So I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to place it in the freezer, leave it there for about 2 minutes, and then bring it back, and we'll finish up the technique. Be right back. I'm back, and I've pulled my image out of the freezer, and now you're going to see that it's curled up, and that's okay. That's what it's supposed to do. And the next job is to crack it. Can you see how that's cracking? Isn't that pretty? There we go. Okay, it's all flattened out now. And now in this up-close shot, you can see all the little hairline cracks all throughout the surface of my focal image. Now, if you're happy with the pattern in the cracked glass, then it's all done. Now you can go on to the next step and you can antique it, or you can just pop it right onto your card and you'll have a beautiful cracked glass focal image. If you're not happy with the way it looks, all is not lost. You don't have to throw this away and start over. All you have to do is toss it back in your lid and get your heat tool and just heat it up all over again. All of that embossing powder will melt again. It'll get all shiny, and then you can pop it back in your freezer and start over. So now that I'm at the point where I want to antique it, let me show you how I do that. I'm going to use a sponge dauber, and I'm going to use a memento ink pad in rich cocoa. I'm going to grab a little bit of ink off of that ink pad onto my dauber, and then I'm just going to press and rub that into the surface of the cracks. And you can see how it just accentuates some of those cracked lines. And then if I grab a paper towel and just wipe away the excess off the surface, it softens it just a little bit. But you can see how all of those lines now are enhanced and it looks a little bit more antiqued. Let me show you my finished project. Here in my finished project, you can see I've antiqued my cracked glass, and I've added just a little bit of hemp twine just to give the card a little bit more of a rustic feel. I've added a few copper brads, and the focal image all by itself is just perfect for a card. You really don't need anything else. Once in a while, I like to make cards that are just a picture on the front with no saying, and I like to stamp my saying on the inside. And that's what I've done here. When you open it up, I've lined the inside with a piece of ivory cardstock, and I've stamped the "Blessed are those who can give without remembering and receive without forgetting" stamp from the Thanks a Million stamp set. Cracked glass is a gorgeous way to enhance a focal image on a card. Or try it with quote stamps to place in your scrapbook pages for unique embellishments that catch the eye.